I would say the bond market is in the process of taking the printing press away from the central banks. So that era of central bank omnipotence and the freedom to do whatever they wanted to do is now behind us.
6th of October 2023 at 8 p.m. GMT. You're very welcome to World War III. And that was Bill Fleckenstein, the legendary investment guru, pondering the future of the central banks and announcing in his view that the bond market, is taking the printing press away from the central banks. Why? Because it's World War III. And we're looking at why Putin is ceding ground in Ukraine. It's got to do with what Bill's talking about there. Davos-controlled Western media is full of stories about the difficulties that Putin is in due to the sudden surging advance of Ukrainian forces who are retaking territory, and everyone puzzled as to why it is that the Russians are not standing up to this. Because it's World War III. As I said in yesterday's video, which you may not have caught, the war in Ukraine is over. This is World War III, full blown, we're in now, and it was triggered by the attack on the pipeline. That was the first fundamental move in World War III, and all of the dynamics have changed. So let's move from the military battlefield, the muddy fields of southeastern Ukraine, to the lofty halls of the central banks like this. First, Vladimir Putin and the Russian army are not in the business of static defense. When Ukrainians show an interest in advancing at a determined rate and prepared to sacrifice mass casualties to achieve that, well, then they're likely to roll with the punch. And it's called mobile defense. And so you do not attempt to hold territory under that kind of pressure in their ethos. You roll with the punch and you ease back. And they have done this many times, and then they have subsequently been prepared and counterattacked and recovered ground. And the logic of that calculation is very simple. It is what area, how many casualties will they suffer, how much armaments and how much equipment will they lose. Well, okay, if they want to fight like that, then yeah, let's do it. Let's inflict maximum casualties on them as we withdraw. Because this is the long game. This is not about short-termism. Furthermore, the entire philosophy of the Russian army, as explained by Andrei Martynov, for example, and others, is that this is not a battle for territory. Absolutely. No. Their technique is not to battle in pursuit of territorial gain as the primary objective, but instead to battle in such a way as to eliminate the enemy's army. That's the goal. It's not a territorial goal at all. It's wearing down and reducing them to the point where they can no longer function. So that doesn't care about territory. That's interested in a war of attrition and the outcome of that war of attrition. So those are the background which lies behind the military thinking here. And unless these areas taken by Ukrainian forces are of great strategic importance, and they're not, it hasn't gotten to that point, and the Ukrainian advances are faltering, then the Russians are happy to accommodate them and inflict the kind of losses that the Western media is not reporting. Putin is playing the long game, and he's happy to accommodate Ukraine if that's the kind of war they want to fight, because it's extremely costly, and the long term, and World War III is a long game, it's a win for Russia. However, there are other things going on besides on this battlefield, and they've got to do with this other battlefield. Saudi Arabia has indeed chosen to support Russia. Well, that was in the bag a long time back, and that's putting it very simplistically. It's not just about Saudi support for Russia. It's the fact that the Saudis, along with the rest of the OPEC plus cartel, have decided that it's time, because of the falling oil price, I mentioned this previously, that there will be no fall in the oil price. So they're intervening and they're savagely cutting oil. Savagely cutting oil, to the absolute consternation of the Biden administration, who are thrown for 6 and are now attacking Saudi Arabia because of their actions. Because it's not just Saudi Arabia. This is World War III. And it's been fought on energy, and it's been fought on interest rates. That's why we're talking about the central banks at the beginning there in that intro, because we're going to morph from energy to interest rates here, but you're seeing how it's about energy and how the BRICS and the OPEC Plus, in other words, everybody outside of the G7, right, they are pursuing their own independent agenda. And part of that agenda is you do not get off of having to sit on the hard pin of high oil prices as long as you're pursuing your current geopolitical objectives. Remember the time way back in the past when we used to do that to countries in the third world and developing world. We used to mess around with energy prices or financial systems in such a way as to put maximum pressure upon them until such time as their economies start to break and then they yield to Western demands. Well, now it's been played back. This is, as I said in the last video, World War III, and you're very welcome to World War III. And this is the energy component of World War III. And so that pain will continue as long as World War III in its military phase continues in Ukraine, as long as there's no resolution of these issues. And the price of oil is not going down, and certainly not going down in relative terms anytime soon. This is World War III, and this is the energy component of it. And the pain is so bad that they're prepared to turn to Venezuela for oil. That's putting them under pressure. But what Bill Fleckenstein is talking about is the flip side of that pressure on the interest rate side. See, it was back in 2004 that the US Fed began to increase interest rates in a similar fashion to what they've just done. It was slow and relentless. It was 14 Fed meetings in a row with which they raised interest rates by 0.25% relentlessly every time, and that went on until such time as the entire system broke in 2007, 2008. What nobody's admitted to you in the intervening time is that when it broke, it fundamentally broke. I can, however, reassure you that we're not going to go into a depression. Absolutely. We're not going to go into a depression because we're already in one. What do you call 15 years of no growth we're talking about? What do you call a next generation who can't even afford to buy homes to raise children in? We have been in this stagnation all that time. And Bill Fleckenstein is onto the fact that this is all coming to an end. Interest rates are on the march, and it's just not sustainable. Already, nations all around the globe are suffering the effects of effectively a dollar shortage, and the international financial markets have a euro-dollar liquidity problem, which essentially means that everybody, like back in 2007, 2008, is too scared to put their money in unless they get really high guarantees on that money. And that's when cracks start to appear in the financial system, like, for example, with Credit Suisse, like, for example, with the German consumer price index soaring as it is. And we are headed for interesting economic times, as maybe sort of relevantly observed in this Bank of England publication from 2021, just last year, about executing bail-in, an operational guide from the Bank of England, which puts the recent issues in relation to UK debt and Liz Truss and markets and all of that into a very, very sharp perspective, because that's what Bill Fleckenstein is gazing off into the distance, pondering. He's pondering what you just saw, is that the bond markets took the printing press away. The UK government said, I tell you what we're going to do, here's how we're going to fund all of our issues, we're going to just print this, print that, not to worry. And the bond market took one look at this, figured to themselves that we're in bail-in territory, and they shoved rates so hard that the Bank of England had to intervene with virtually unlimited supply of freshly printed money. So essentially what the pension funds have had to do over the last 15 years or so, just no real economy, is invest in all sorts of leveraged products to generate the kind of returns that they need. And what Bill knows, and what I know, and what you now know, is that means that those pension funds are still as insolvent today as they were the day the Bank of England intervened. They're no less insolvent. And the Bank of England has in effect now taken the liabilities of all UK pension funds onto its own balance sheet. So they can go and start buying all the bonds in order to keep the interest rate in the range they wish to keep the interest rate in. But that isn't going to save the currency, because if they do that with the interest rate, then investors are going to take revenge on the currency instead of the interest rate. So you're caught one way or the other. You're going to suffer higher inflation. There's no way out of this. One way or another, those pension funds, if they have malinvested in those ways at interest rates which were 0 and 1 and 2%, and interest rates now head up to the 7, 8 and 9%, then that's game over. And you might be saying, if that's game over, why? And if this is so worrying to the likes of Bill Fleckenstein, why would this be happening, and why would the United States be involved in this? It's because this is their response to the energy warfare. They're shoving the dollar higher, they're shoving interest rates higher, and we're going to find out whether they can break economies using interest rates and dollar strength faster than they can be strangled by other economies using energy as the weapon of counter. So this isn't about the muddy battlefields of Ukraine anymore. This isn't the Ukraine war anymore. This is World War III. And we, you, I, and all the rest of us are caught right up in the middle of it. And it's got dynamics that are far worse than 2007, 2008. And those are the kind of dynamics that Bill Fleckenstein is concerned about. There's only one thing, I said at the beginning, that Bill Fleckenstein's got slightly wrong, or not exactly right. It isn't the market taking the printing press away from the central banks. It's the market taking the printing press away from the G7 central banks. And one of the reasons they might be doing that is because the G7 is fundamentally bust, bankrupt. Interesting times. Welcome to World War III. I'll be back with more on that and other topics which are perhaps less serious in import, and I hope you can join me for that too. But for the moment, for breakfornews.com and informedconsent.ie, this has been Vincent Dunn reporting. See you soon.